Okay. Okay. All right. So let's go and get started. Welcome everyone to the Hackformers August 2014 event, the educational meeting. Welcome to Jonathan. It was new year, first time. So actually, we usually do like a 5-minute spiel on who Hackformers is, but I don't have anything ready for presenting. But I'll tell you, Hackformers is Christians who are commissioned with the mission of transforming for Christ. So hackers in the information security industry who are transforming for Christ as well. We have educational meetings, and then our Twitter handle is @Hackformers. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. The rest of you all, I think I kind of know, and you've all been here a couple of times, spoken here and other things. So good. We have today a very good speaker, David Longenecker. He works at Intel. He's a father of 5. I like this bio. He's a follower of Christ first, which is faith. Then his father of 5, which is his family. And then he talked about all the other stuff in terms of security research. And he's an independent security researcher as well. He's going to talk to us today about phishing for men and women. And, I'll leave it up to David. David, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I guess a good place to start is, who am I? First off, I am a follower of Christ. And I'm a father of 5. I've got 2 boys about to start high school. I've got a girl in middle school, and I've got a boy and a girl in elementary school. So they take up a good chunk of my time. My day job, I'm the land technology owner for Intel, which means I'm the point where engineering and operations meet up with policy. I help operations and engineering to understand what it is we're trying to secure and to understand how we're managing the risk. And I help the policymakers to understand the technologies so that they can write policies that make sense. Outside of my day job, though, I also am just a curious soul who likes to do research and see what I can break and then see how I can fix it. A couple of the things that I have managed to break and then have worked with organizations to fix are the textag.org website, the tolling authority for Texas highways, a couple of Soho routers, and I'm currently sitting on a password reset flaw at a fairly well-known financial institution. At that institution, knowing a couple of pieces of information about you that are pretty easy to determine, the only thing I need to figure out is a 4-digit key, and then I can reset your password and take over complete control of your financial assets. Not exactly a good state, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. And outside of security research, I am the commander for the Awana Club in Dripping Springs, which is a children's ministry. We, in the past year, have taught the gospel to about 100 kids between preschool and 5th grade, and are trying to figure out how to reach the other 2,400 in our school district. So I'm not going to presume that everybody watching this presentation or everybody in this room is a Christian. I'm not going to presume that everybody has the same beliefs as I have, but I do want to share what it is that I believe because it's the foundation for who I am and what I do. And I'll share my faith in the same way that I would share it with the Awana students. First off, we serve a God who is loving. John 3:16 says that God loves us, and He loves us enough that He wants us to be with Him. But He is also holy. As Revelation 4:8 says, He is holy, and that holiness demands holiness out of us if we're to be in His presence. So there's a problem there. According to Romans 3:23, I'm a sinner. I've broken God's law, as has every other person on earth. And according to Romans 6:23, the consequence of that sin is death, both in the bodily sense, that its body is going to die, but also in the spiritual sense. If I'm not right with God, I've got eternal separation from Him ahead of me. Literally, I've got eternity in hell ahead of me. So I've got a sin problem here that I can't deal with on my own. Thankfully, God took the first step. according to Romans 5:8, he demonstrated his love for me in that while I was still a sinner, before I could get my life straight, he took the first step. He sent his son to pay that price that I should have had to pay, leaving the ball in my court. According to Acts 16:31, my job is to believe that Jesus is God, to believe that he died to pay the penalty that I should have had to pay for my sins, and to believe that he came back to life, that death was not sufficient to beat him. And that's why I stand up here and use the words of Paul, according to 1 Corinthians 15:3 and 4. I pass on to you what I learned as of first importance, that Christ died for my sins, according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and he was raised again on the third day, according to the Scriptures. And because of that, I put my faith in Christ, and I found my life on him. So several weeks ago, I was driving through South Austin, driving through the Wyatt Oak Hill, and out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a friend of mine who was at the scene of a minor accident. I only got a passing glance, so I couldn't be positive it was the person that I thought it was. And there were 100 different excuses I gave for not stopping to find out. It was at the other side of the divided highway. There's really no easy way to get over there. It looked like a very minor accident. It didn't seem like there was any need for someone to stop and help. This person was already speaking with a police officer. There was someone on the scene to offer assistance. I had all of my kids in the car with me. I wouldn't have had room to offer any assistance. We had just begun a 5-hour drive to East Texas and had dinner plans with my grandmother. If I had stopped to check on this scene, we would have missed our plans. Lots of different excuses. And the more I drove down the highway, the easier it was to justify, just keep on going. There's really no need to stop. But as it turned out, it was the person that I thought it was. And it was a minor accident. No one was injured. But her van was disabled and was out of service for a couple of weeks. And she has a disabled son, so it's a modified van to accommodate the wheelchair. There's nothing practical I could have done to help. I couldn't have helped with my van even if I had stopped. But I missed the chance to be a friend to a friend who was going through a stressful situation. So what's the point of telling this story? The point is, there are times when it takes a figurative 2x4 to the head to get our attention, but that's not usually the way God works. More often than not, if we look at 1 Kings 19, it's the story of Elijah up on the mountaintop. He sees these massive forces of nature. He sees a windstorm. He sees a huge fire. He sees an earthquake. But God's not speaking to him through any of these massive forces of nature. God speaks to him through a quiet voice, through a quiet wind. And that's the way that it typically is. Elijah only heard his voice because Elijah was intently listening for that voice. And that's the way it is with us. A couple of years ago, a musical band called Casting Crowns put out a song called Slow Fade. And the chorus of that song says, it's a slow fade when you give your life away. It's a slow fade when black and white have turned to gray. Thoughts invade. Choices are made. And a price will be paid when you give your life away. People never crumble in a day. I doubt anyone woke up this morning and decided, I'm going to put myself into financial ruin today. Maybe it starts out with Thursday night poker with the guys. Maybe it starts out with just stretching credit a little bit too far. Maybe it's a weekend in Vegas where things got out of hand and you rung up a debt that you never intended to ring up. Maybe struggling in business means it becomes difficult to make ends meet. You miss a mortgage payment or two, you start to worry about losing the house. Then personal pride steps in. We're too ashamed to let our friends and family know that we need a helping hand. A year later, you're facing 15 years in prison for bank robbery. That didn't happen overnight. doubt anyone woke up this morning and decided, I'm going to wreck my family today. Maybe it starts out with a seemingly harmless flirt in the office. Maybe it starts out with adjusting your bicycle route to correspond with an attractive neighbor's jogging route. Maybe, and this is an insidious risk in our line of work, maybe it starts out with researching the underbelly of the internet and getting hooked on porn. 3 years later, your children are wondering why daddy or mommy has a different address. But it didn't happen overnight. And an example that has a particular timeliness, I doubt anyone woke up this morning and decided, I'm going to throw my life away and leave my family and friends to pick up all the pieces. It might start with a small voice saying your life has no purpose, or that your accomplishments are worthless. It may be a period of sadness that just seems never to end. It could be an illness that just grinds away at our endurance. Then depression sinks its cruel claws in and blinds us to the reasons to live. And 10 years later, we're watching in shock as a beloved comedian and actor is laid to rest. But it didn't happen overnight. And that's the point. None of this happened overnight. And for the most part, it didn't happen due to any blatantly obvious opportunity to do something irreversible. Opportunities to compromise our character, as well as opportunities to be the hands and feet of Christ, usually are subtle. We have to be alert to recognize those opportunities. The same principle holds true in security. Occasionally, we see blatant signs of a compromise. It's hard to miss CryptoLocker taking over your computer, putting up a big red screen saying, pay me money, or your life's work has gone down the drain. But that's not the usual MO. Far more common is point-of-sale compromise that doesn't come to light until weeks, if not months, after the attack took place. Or the phish that you never realized you fell for. Cybercrime has a couple of common drivers, but one of the most common is money. It's a business. It's a business in which the masterminds profit by not being caught. The longer they can keep one activity going on without having to change their plans, the more they profit. Coming up with a new attack plan costs them, whether it's in terms of money to hire a developer to develop a new piece of code, or in the time that it takes to devise a new approach. Changing approaches costs the attacker. If your computer has been conscripted into a botnet, the attacker profits by keeping control of your computer so that they can continue to use it as a spam relay or as a piece in a distributed denial of service attack. If an attacker has infiltrated a point-of-sale device, they profit longer by staying hidden so that they can continue to collect credit cards and ATM debit numbers and all of this financial information. If they make themselves obvious, then the controllers of that network are going to shut down the malicious activity, and then the attackers are back to the drawing board. So it's in their best interest not to get caught. So most attacks are detected because someone was looking in the right place at the right time with the right degree of skepticism or intuition, not because there was some big red flag that the world is crying about. Now, a couple of decades ago, viruses and worms and Trojans typically sought to compromise the computer. But around a decade ago, a new trend started emerging in which the target was the human rather than the computer. And that's what phishing is. It's an attempt to get a victim to reveal valuable information. That information may be financial accounts. It may be personally identifying information they can use to impersonate you. It may be access credentials to get into your accounts. There's a variety of different types of information that an attacker could profit from But the point of it is the phish is an attempt to collect information from you, and generally in a way where you think you're giving the information to a legitimate party. Now, most of you in this room are probably pretty familiar with this, but I tend to write and teach in such a way that my grandmother could understand. So I'm going more basic than perhaps you in the room really care to hear. You and I may or not fall for a particular scam because we're by nature suspicious, we're by nature paranoids. But the typical user, they just want things to work. So the first step in a phishing campaign is to cast some bait. Sometimes that bait is targeted at a particular individual, but more often than not, that bait is just cast out broadly with the hopes that somebody will stumble across it, somebody will take that bait. In this case, the bait is an email pretending to be from USAA, offering a new security feature. So I received this email to my inbox, and since I and others in my family do in fact do business with USAA, it caught my attention. There's nothing particularly unique about this particular message. To me, it was fairly obvious to see that it was not legitimate. For one, it doesn't match the format that USAA today uses, but it is pretty darn close to the format that they used a couple of years ago. So a person not suspicious may have accepted that at face value. And so I did what any researcher worth his salt would do. I took the bait and documented what I found so that I could use it as an education opportunity. So this phish obviously looks nothing like the current format, but it does look very much like the format that USAA used a couple of years ago. There's a couple of clues in this message that make it pretty obvious that this is not legitimate. If you hover over the sender's name, instead of USAA Web Services at customers.usaa.com, it's at this odd domain out here. I know to hover over the username, or the sender's name, to see who actually sent it. Not everybody would know that. And more to the point, the sender is very much like an envelope. It's pretty easy to spoof or to imitate being sent by someone legitimate. In this case, they did not do so, but it would be pretty easy to make it look like it really came from USAA. Secondly, down here, instead of www.usaa.com, it's www.3usaa.com. Again, to me, that's a dead giveaway, but if I'm not paying attention, I may just blindly click on that. More importantly, the attacker could very easily have used a character that looked exactly like a dot instead of the 3, or could have used some JavaScripting to change what appears on the screen versus what the link actually is. Beginning about 10 years ago with multilingual domain support, there are now different character sets where you can use a character that is visually identical to the actual website and still goes to a different location. So there are ways that this could have been made to look more legitimate and more difficult to detect that it is a fraud, which is one of the reasons that we suggest to individuals to use bookmarks or to type in the website themselves for a site that is important to you. Because you never know what the link actually is, even if it looks exactly the way you would expect it to look. Once you've clicked on the link, and a little bit of backstory here. I'm curious enough to investigate this, but I'm not curious enough to click on the link on my production PC. So in this case, I'm using a virtual machine, and I'm going to start by using wget, which is a command line web browser that's not going to render any of the content. So I can download it to my PC and poke around at the code and see what's actually there. And in this case, what's actually there is no executable, no script, no binary. It's just code, just display. But it's display that looks deceptively accurate. there's nothing on here that would tell you that this is not truly something that USAA sent. And that's one of the points here. Our attackers have gotten very good at imitating the real thing. In this case, the concept was that USAA had sent me a message telling me that I had an email in my secure mailbox at usaa.com. So had that been the case, when I clicked on the link, I should have had to log in before seeing this message. So that's a subtle clue. Also, oddly, every one of those links, the secure logon, the My Security Advisor, as well as the obligatory unsubscribe or contact us, change your email, all of those links pointed to the exact same thing, which again, we're at www.3.usaa.com. So there's some subtle clues here that we're still not going in the right direction. But once you've taken the initial bait, it's real hard to recognize that you're going down a slippery slope. And it gets even harder. The next step is the login screen. Now, if you're familiar with USAA, and I suspect a couple of y'all in the room are familiar with USAA, that looks very, very much like the actual USAA logon screen. It looks that way because it is using the actual configuration scripts, the actual state scripts from usaa.com, and the actual images from usaa.com. They're using the style sheets from the real thing to make it look like the real thing. So, now strangely, I can enter anything I want as a username and password and it's going to accept it. So there's a little bit of a clue right there. But by this point, if you're the typical user, you're hooked. The next step, to me, is another aha moment because I have two-factor authentication enabled. I should never see this screen asking me for my PIN. I should instead see a screen asking me for the code that has been emailed or has been texted to my phone. But I'll bet most users do not have two-factor authentication enabled. This is exactly what they're going to see next. And what are they going to do? They're going to enter their actual PIN and proceed to the next screen. And here's the meat. This is what the attacker was really after. After collecting your username and your password and your PIN, now they want to get some personal information about you. Oh, by the way, they want to get your email username and your email password. So why not, if I'm going to give you my financial credentials, let me also give you my email credentials so you can completely hack the rest of my life. And they're going to ask for a couple of security questions, a couple of more pieces of information that they can use to mimic you, to steal your identity, to imitate you, look exactly like you to somebody else. And finally, after entering all of that information, I'm deposited on the actual legitimate usaa.com logout page. So if I've gone all the way through this course as an unsuspecting user, I think that I have logged on to USAA and have provided an extra layer of security by answering some security questions. And now I've logged back off and I have made myself more secure when in fact what I have done is given an attacker the ability to completely compromise my financial state. And then by giving them my email address, that email address is typically the way to reset passwords for anything else that I may have. So they own my email, they own my financials, they have the ability to own my social media, they have the ability to own additional financial resources, they have the ability to own me completely. All because I fell for that initial hook. And that's ultimately my point here. Scammers are very good at imitating the genuine article. They're so good, in fact, that if we miss these subtle beginning clues, becomes next to impossible later down that slide to realize that we are falling down and giving our life away. Which means it's absolutely critical that we pay attention for that first clip, and catch that first clip. And that's what I've got.
Did you have the contact slide or something?
Yes, I did. Thanks. Cool. And I did report this to USAA. They're aware of quite a few different phishing expeditions. It's no surprise to them. And this particular one, in fact, by the time I got to researching it, the actual domain name had been taken offline, so I had to do some DNS lookups and find the IP address and go in through some back doors to be able to get to the web page in the first place. And the DNS names themselves were blocked by, I use OpenDNS. There are other products that will block known malicious, known phishing sites. So those steps would be effective. Those steps would minimize the risk of an attack like this having any particularly long life. But if you were there in the first 6 or 8 hours before any of those actions took place, you're hooked.